Oh, okay. We are live on YouTube and going live on Instagram. Hang tight here. Okay, live on Instagram, live on YouTube. Bear with me as I'm trying to manage both of these because it's still new to me. And today I'm talking about why, if you have an eating disorder, you are not broken, and why it's really important to understand that when you are working to recover from an eating disorder. Oftentimes, I hear people saying, and I even believed it myself, that there's something wrong with me, I'm broken, I need fixing, I need to better myself, I need to improve myself. And when we come from a place of needing to better ourselves and needing to improve ourselves, how that can actually cause more pain for us, and how we may continue to deal with that pain by engaging in our eating disorder and strengthening our eating disorder behavior. So before I get into that, first things first is I will be talking about eating disorders. I will potentially be mentioning behaviors. I will be talking about, oh, hey, Anne, hi. I will be talking about um, systems of oppression, and I will be talking about exercise as well. So if any of this is going to be causing more pain and more strife and puts you back further in your recovery, please click away. This will be recorded so you can always come back later. Give you a moment for that. And then the other thing is that information is important. So I'm giving information today. However, this is only going to be as helpful to you as you are able to feel it in your body. So what I mean by that is information is important, but I really want to emphasize it's important to be working with somebody who is able to help you do the work of being in your body so that you can hear something that I'm saying. But the reason that it's going to be impactful to you is because it resonates in your body. So that's how I often will find things that are helpful to me by listening to somebody else or watching somebody else, is by noticing what actually resonates in my body, what comes up, not by like trying to memorize what they're saying and really trying to make sure I understand every single detail. That's not important. And that can just lead to more perfectionism and other things that continue to keep an eating disorder going strong and keep us disconnected from our bodies. So, with that being said, back to the main point here, which is why it's important to come from a place of completeness and wholeness when you are recovering from an eating disorder, and not from a place of brokenness, lacking, needing to be fixed, needing to be cured. I hear this one all the time. People joke about it in the eating disorder treatment center that I work at. They'll make a joke like, "Oh, now I'm cured." Okay, as if they're coming there to like get this special thing, and then when they leave, everything's good and they're going to be good for life. No other problems are going to come up. And the thing is that it's fun, and it's fun to talk about, and of course, for any kind of pain that we have in our lives, we would want something to just come in, blow, make it go away. Oh, I see you. Oh, hi. Um, and so the thing that's important is that you're going to have these beliefs. If you've been believing that I'm broken or that I need fixing or that I'm lacking, and that there's no way to force them to go away. So notice if this is a belief that you have, that I need to be fixed, that I need to be cured, that I'm broken, um, that ill is another one, that I'm ill. I don't actually believe if you have an eating disorder that you're ill. Now, why do I say this? I say this because if you can imagine back to the time when you first engaged in an eating disorder, or if you can imagine back to the time when you felt like things were out of your control, or you felt anger, or you felt sadness, this is probably back in childhood. If you can go back to that moment, you pretty quickly recognize that when you went to an eating disorder, when you went to controlling your food or controlling exercise and controlling your body, you were doing that from a place of trying to help yourself, of trying to keep yourself safe. And when you can touch on that moment, then that actually is one of the first things to open up the door to some tenderness, for yourself because it will often bring up sadness. So for me, I can think back to a lot of times not fitting in, not feeling good enough. But I always, if I were to write a book about my story, it always goes back to two places. One is like a spiritual moment when I was really little, but I'm not going to talk about that one right now. Then the second one is when I was on the Mouseside Trail and my family is like me, my dad, and my sister, my mom. We always spread out. Okay, we were all going our own paces. And I remember I being very young. I was like seven or 10. And my mom's behind, my sister's behind, and I'm trying to keep up with my dad. But I'm getting really, really tired. And I'm like breathing really, really hard. And if you're in Washington State, I'm not sure where y'all are at, but if you're in Washington State, you probably know Mount Si because it's a very popular hiking trail. It's like 4 miles uphill, pretty steep. Anyway, and I remember just like huffing and puffing and feeling scared that I was not going to be able to keep up. And I remember saying, like, well, actually struggling in my head, like, do I say something to my dad or not? Do I say something to my dad or not? And the whole time, like, trying to keep up with him as I'm thinking this. And then finally, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to say something. And I said, Dad, can we slow down? And he said, you don't have to keep up with me. And so in that moment, I felt panic, like, oh my God, I'm dying here. But if I stay on this trail by myself, I'm so scared to be like out in the woods by myself on this trail. I don't know what I'm doing. And so in that moment, I just kept up. So for me, pushing through and keeping up and overperforming and controlling my body has been a way of survival and protecting myself. And when my therapist asked me, well, what would you tell that young person in that moment? I had to sit with that for a moment because I recognized that there was nothing I would tell that person except for thank you. Because in that moment, that was the best thing that I could do to protect myself and keep myself safe. And even saying that brings up some sadness in my throat, in my chest, and a little bit in my stomach. And so for you, it's going to be different, whatever your experience is when you were little. And if you can touch on that place, and recognize that you did the best you could with what you had to keep yourself safe and for or whatever other reason, usually it is something around safety or to keep yourself feeling loved, that will open you up to a tender place. Like for me, it opens up some sadness. Well, that opens up some tenderness in me and also some self-compassion for the my young self at that time. Hello, welcome, welcome. And and then also opens up grief. So that's the other reason that we don't want to go to these places and we'd rather focus on just fixing ourselves and just bettering ourselves so that we actually don't have to touch on the grief that's underlying the eating disorder behaviors that we have engaged with for however long to keep ourselves safe. So, brokenness, we can see that it is just a thought and that it is a thought that protects us from grief often. Because what if you're already whole right now? What if you're already complete right now? What if you are so radiant and wonderful and brilliant right now and that there isn't anything wrong with you? Well, then without that facade of like there's something to fix, it gets us right in touch with our pain. And that's often what the eating disorder is protecting us from. So what is important here? What's important is this can only be accessed in the present moment. So you can think back, like I was thinking back to being on that trail. You can think back to instances. However, when you're doing that, it's important to recognize what is coming up in your body. And if you're working with anybody, if you're working with a peer counselor, if you're working with a coach, if you're working with a therapist, if you're working with a yoga teacher, if you're working with a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a treatment team, a doctor, a spiritual advisor, there's so many ways to get support, but I'm just mentioning a few of them. If you're working with anybody, a sign of somebody that's actually helpful is somebody who can check in with you and bring you to the present moment and ask you what's coming up for you right now in this moment as you think back to that time, or what's coming up with you right now as you consider that you aren't broken. What's coming up with you right now in your body as you consider that brokenness is just a thought? What is it like to let that thought just be there and not try to get wrapped up in it, not try to argue with it, not try to push it away or make it go away? What's coming up in your body? That's a sign of a really helpful provider. Again, whoever you're choosing to engage with. And this support is really, really important because we get outside of ourselves. We get caught in our head. I get caught in my head all the time. And it's really helpful to have someone from an outside perspective be able to comment, be able to ask me questions, and be able to guide me back to my own wisdom, back to my own wholeness, back to my own completeness, so that I can get in touch with what's really going on right now. And the reason that that's important is because when you're in touch with what's really going on right now, you can make a decision based on truth rather than a decision based on an illusion of brokenness. Okay. When we're coming from a place of brokenness, we are actually acting from a place of illusion. And so the decisions we're making is not based on the truth of ourselves, because the truth is we are complete, we are whole, we were never broken in the first place. There was a very legitimate reason that we went to disordered eating, we went to compulsive exercise, that we went to controlling our body, that we went to pushing and overperforming. There is a very legitimate reason, and it's really important to have compassion for that reason and go into that. So I don't want to just yammer on and lose people. If you have any questions right now, feel free to ask them. I think you can put them in the chat circle. I just want to touch base and see if anyone has any questions. I'm on YouTube and Instagram, so I'm going back and forth. That's why I keep looking at different screens. Let me know if there's any questions right now, because I know it can be shocking to hear, like, what? I'm not broken? But I've been trying to fix myself and better myself for my whole life. Like, that's what I do. That's what takes up my time. That's what takes up that space. And that's another thing. Well, what if that space wasn't taken up by bettering, fixing, improving? What might show up? And by having to continually better and fix and change, what are we trying to avoid by filling up that space with having to improve and fix ourselves? All right, I don't see any questions. Let me see. Yeah, I already have touched on, if you look at some of my posts about the brilliance of choosing an eating disorder, of choosing compulsive exercise, of choosing overperforming in systems of oppression. So again, systems where the divine feminine has been snuffed out, where we are brutally assaulting our planet Earth, like our own home, where we, in the United States, where we live in a country that's based on colonizing and stealing land, erasing cultures and genocide, and then also the brutal, horrific human trafficking of the transatlantic slave trade. So when you think about all of these systems that created where we live today and that they still impact us today, it's very understandable why we would go to controlling ourselves to try to keep ourselves safe in these oppressive, harmful systems. Now, that is not to say that eating disorders does not cause harm. This is an important distinction. So even when I say you're not broken, you don't need fixing, there's nothing wrong with you, you're not lacking, that is not saying an eating disorder does not cause harm. An eating disorder causes harm at its extreme. It can kill you. That is the truth as we know it. And I think it may be like number 2 right now as far as behavioral health struggles that people die from. So it's very serious. And at the same time, there's a reason people go to this extreme to try to keep themselves safe, because they feel like they are in harmful situations. And this also may be you. Now, that doesn't mean you had like this one major event that was just like super traumatic. It may have been, but oftentimes you can't trace it back to one event. So sometimes it can be something that's just been underneath the surface your whole life and you couldn't quite touch on it, but it was just always there. Okay, so there's lots of ways that this shows up for people, and it's not important that you know exactly why, where, and how. The important part is being able to be with yourself with what comes up and notice where you're trying to fix, change, better yourself, improve yourself, and then check in like what's going on right here. Okay. So there's nothing wrong with change. Change is important and change is a constant. It's just that change doesn't actually have to be forced when we're in touch with ourselves and when we're in touch with our basic goodness. So if it's not any more questions, I'm going to end it there because it's been about 15 minutes. We don't want to drag this on too long, but the main takeaway is you are not broken. There's a very valid reason or reasons that you may have gone to disordered eating behaviors, and that it's important to come from a place of wholeness when recovering from an eating disorder, because that is actually your reality. There is your essence has never been touched by an eating disorder. It is flawless. And getting in touch with that is actually where you recover from, flourish, and expand. Okay, that's it. Thank you for joining. Take care.